Welcome to Ab Immemorabili. From time beyond memory, I'm Drake.
And I'm Holly. Where ancient wisdom meets modern minds.
Brought to you by the most ancient anamnetic order of Trikala, for seekers everywhere, whether you're walking with us or simply curious about the path.
Each episode, we explore the hidden patterns that connect philosophy, consciousness, and human transformation.
Drawing from traditions east and west, old and new, familiar and forgotten.
Because some truths exist outside of time, waiting to be remembered, not learned.
On this episode, we're exploring a question that might define our entire era. Are we standing at the threshold of another great transformation of human consciousness? Could we be witnessing the dawn of what some call a Second Axial Age?
Drake, that's quite a provocative way to begin. For those who might not be familiar with the concept, what exactly was the first axial age, and why should we care about it today?
Right, let's set the stage properly. The term comes from Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher and psychiatrist who lived from 1883 to 1969. After the Second World War, Jaspers was trying to understand something profound about human history. He noticed something extraordinary. Between roughly 800 and 200 BCE, something unprecedented happened across the entire civilized world, seemingly independently.
And when you say something unprecedented, you're not just talking about new inventions or political systems, are you?
No, this was far more fundamental. This was the birth of individual consciousness as we know it. Before this period, what we call pre-axial consciousness, humans lived completely embedded in their tribes, their myths, their immediate reality. There was no stepping back to examine life, no real conception of individual moral responsibility separate from the collective. No ability to think about thinking itself.
It's almost impossible to imagine, isn't it? Not being able to step outside your own experience and reflect on it, not having that observer self that we take for granted.
Exactly. Pre-axial consciousness was mythological consciousness. The gods weren't metaphors or symbols. They were real, immediate presences walking among humans. The king wasn't symbolically divine. He was literally the god's representative on earth. Your identity was entirely your role in the tribe. There was no you separate from your function. If you were a farmer, you weren't someone who happened to farm. You were farming itself, inseparable from the activity.
But then, across the world, almost simultaneously, everything began to shift.
Yes, and here's where it gets truly remarkable. In Greece, we get Socrates walking through the agora asking, what is the good life? And what is justice? In India, Siddhartha Gautama sits under the Bodhi tree and achieves enlightenment, becoming the Buddha. In China, Confucius, develops his ethical system based on Ren, humaneness. In Persia, Zoroaster proclaims the cosmic battle between light and darkness, good and evil. In Israel, the great prophets arise speaking of individual responsibility before God, of justice and righteousness.
All within just a few centuries of each other. No internet, no global communication, yet this transformation happened almost everywhere at once.
And here's what's crucial to understand. These weren't just new ideas added to the old framework. This was a fundamental rewiring of human consciousness itself. For the first time in history, humans could think about thinking. They could step back from their embedded reality and ask, what is real? What is good? What is true? And how do I know?
The birth of philosophy itself.
More than that, the birth of the individual as we understand it. The capacity for what we might call second-order thinking. Not just having thoughts, but examining those thoughts. Not just following rules, but questioning why those rules exist. Not just living within a story, but asking whether the story is true.
And this is what Jaspers noticed, that all the major religious and philosophical traditions we still draw from today emerged from this period.
Precisely. Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Greek philosophy, Zoroastrianism, prophetic Judaism, they all arise during the Axial Age. And what's fascinating is that they all share certain characteristics despite emerging independently. They all emphasize ethical behavior over ritual correctness. They all speak to the individual rather than just the collective. They all suggest that there's something more to reality than what appears on the surface.
So, if that was the first axial age, transforming us from embedded mythological consciousness to reflective individual consciousness, What makes people think we might be approaching a second one?
Well, let's look at the patterns. First, consider what's happening with global connectivity. Through digital technology, we're experiencing something unprecedented in human history. Every human with a smartphone has potential access to the entirety of human knowledge, to communication with any other connected human, to real-time awareness of global events.
It's what Teilhard de Chardin predicted back in the early 20th century, isn't it? The noosphere.
Exactly. Teilhard was a Jesuit priest and paleontologist who proposed that just as life created the biosphere around our planet, human thought and consciousness would create another sphere, the noosphere, from the Greek nous, meaning mind. He saw this as evolution's next stage, not just biological evolution, but the evolution of consciousness itself.
And he was writing this before computers, before the internet. Yet he somehow anticipated this web of global consciousness we're creating.
What's remarkable is how accurate his vision was. He described humanity developing a thinking layer around the planet, neurons of a global brain connecting through technology. Sound familiar?
But Drake, having Facebook and Twitter doesn't automatically mean we're evolving, does it? I mean, sometimes it seems like social media is making us less conscious, not more.
You're absolutely right to push back on that. The technology might be necessary, but not sufficient. What's more significant is what Ken Wilber and other integral philosophers call the emergence of vision logic, or integral consciousness. This isn't just about being connected, it's about developing new capacities of awareness.
Can you break that down? What does vision logic actually look like in practice?
Think about how we're forced to approach problems now versus even 50 years ago. Take climate change. You can't think about it without simultaneously considering economics, politics, technology, psychology, cultural values, spirituality, all at once. You have to hold multiple perspectives, see how different systems interact, understand feedback loops and emergent properties. It requires a kind of thinking that transcends simple linear logic.
So it's like we're developing a meta perspective on perspectives themselves?
Precisely. And this is crucial. The first axial age gave us the ability to have a perspective, to step back from embedded experience. Now we're developing the ability to see that all perspectives are partial. That truth emerges from holding multiple viewpoints simultaneously.
It reminds me of that old parable about the blind men and the elephant. Each one touches a different part and thinks they know what an elephant is. One feels the trunk and says it's like a snake. Another feels the leg and says it's like a tree.
But imagine if they could somehow share their perspectives, integrate them, understand that the elephant is all of these things and none of them exclusively. That's the kind of consciousness we're talking about.
There's something we haven't addressed yet, though. The first axial age didn't emerge from prosperity and comfort. It came from crisis, didn't it?
You've touched on something absolutely crucial. Yes, the axial age coincided with massive upheaval. The collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations, the rise of iron weapons making warfare more democratic and deadly, massive migrations, the breakdown of old certainties. As the order teaches, there's often a wound that creates the opening for the gift.
The wound and the gift, transformation through crisis. And we'd certainly qualify for crisis today, wouldn't we?
On multiple levels simultaneously. Environmental crisis with climate change and ecosystem collapse, political crisis with polarization and the breakdown of democratic norms, economic crisis with inequality reaching historical extremes, and perhaps most significantly, what many philosophers are calling the meaning crisis.
Tell me more about this meaning crisis. What does that actually mean?
John Vervaeke at the University of Toronto has done brilliant work on this. Essentially, just as pre-axial mythological consciousness broke down before the first axial age, our modern rational materialist worldview is showing profound cracks. The story science tells us that we're accidental arrangements of atoms in a meaningless universe. Might be factually accurate, but it's psychologically and spiritually devastating.
It's like we've explained everything and understood nothing.
Beautifully put. We have more information than ever, but less wisdom. More connection, but more loneliness. More possibilities, but less purpose. The frameworks that worked for our grandparents, traditional religion, nationalism, simple progress narratives, they don't convince anymore, but we haven't found what replaces them.
And you're suggesting this crisis might be labor pains for a new form of consciousness?
It's possible. Remember, crisis creates pressure for transformation, but it doesn't guarantee it. The Bronze Age collapse could have led to permanent barbarism, but instead it catalyzed the Axial Age. Our current crisis could lead to regression, collapse, or breakthrough.
So let's imagine we are on the brink of a second axial age. What would it actually look like? What emerges?
Well, if the first axial age gave us individuals capable of stepping back from embedded mythological consciousness, perhaps the second gives us individuals capable of stepping back from individuality itself while still maintaining it.
Wait, that sounds paradoxical. How do you step back from individuality without losing yourself?
It's not about losing individuality, but transcending and including it. Think of it this way: a cell in your body is still a complete individual cell, but it also participates in the larger life of your organism. It maintains its cellular identity while serving the whole.
So we'd maintain our individual consciousness, but also be able to participate consciously in larger fields of awareness?
Exactly. And we're already seeing hints of this. Group meditation practices where people report experiencing shared consciousness. Constellation work in therapy where people can feel into family or systemic fields. Even in business, teams that develop what's called collective flow, where the group seems to think as one mind while each member remains distinct.
I've experienced something like this in really good collaborative work, where ideas seem to arise from between people rather than from any individual.
Yes. And notice how that's different from pre-axial collective consciousness, where you lose yourself in the group. This is conscious participation in collective intelligence while maintaining individual agency. You choose to tune in, you can step back and reflect on it. You remain sovereign even while participating in something larger.
It's like the difference between being swept away by a mob and choosing to join a dance where everyone maintains their own steps while creating something together.
That's a perfect analogy. And this connects to what we're seeing emerge in various fields. Systems thinking that sees wholes rather than just parts. Complexity science that studies emergence. Ecological thinking that understands interdependence. These aren't just new ideas. They require new capacities of consciousness to truly grasp.
Drake, I want to explore something else. The first axial age had specific figures we can point to: Buddha, Confucius, Socrates, the Hebrew prophets. If we're in a second axial age, who are its prophets?
That's fascinating to consider. Perhaps the second axial age doesn't work through individual prophets the way the first one did. Maybe it's more distributed, more collective. Instead of singular sages, we might have networks of awakening.
Though there are certainly figures pointing the way. You mentioned Wilber with integral theory. There's also people like Joanna Macy with her Work That Reconnects, Thomas Berry with his New Story of the Universe, Indigenous elders sharing traditional ecological knowledge.
Notice how many of these voices are calling us to remember something ancient while moving forward. It's not purely progressive, it's more like a spiral, returning to earlier wisdom at a higher level of complexity.
The mystics are becoming scientists, and the scientists are discovering mysticism.
Yes, when quantum physicists start sounding like Zen masters, when neuroscientists study meditation, when economists discover Buddhist concepts of interdependence, the boundaries that defined axial age thinking are dissolving.
Speaking of dissolving boundaries, there's another pattern I've noticed. The first axial age was very focused on transcendence, rising above material existence to find truth. But what's emerging now seems more focused on integration.
That's a crucial observation. First axial spirituality often saw the body as a prison, the material world as illusion, earthly life as something to escape. But emerging consciousness seems to be about sacred embodiment, finding spirit in matter, recognizing earth as sacred rather than fallen.
It's particularly evident in how we're reconsidering our relationship with nature, not as something to transcend or dominate, but as something we're part of.
And this might be essential for our survival. We literally cannot solve environmental crisis from a consciousness that sees nature as other. We need what philosophers call an ecological self, an identity that includes the larger living systems we're part of.
There's something else about timing we should consider. The first axial age took centuries to unfold and even longer to spread globally. Buddhism took nearly 1,000 years to fully reach China. Greek philosophy took centuries to influence Europe through Islamic scholars. If we're in a second axial age, could it happen faster?
The acceleration is remarkable to consider. What once took centuries now happens in years or even months. A meditation technique developed in California can be practiced in Cairo within days. A philosophical insight from a Japanese philosopher can influence a Brazilian artist immediately.
But does speed help or hinder genuine transformation? I mean, consciousness evolution seems to require time, integration, embodiment. Can you download enlightenment?
That's the key question, isn't it? Perhaps the acceleration isn't in the individual transformation. That might still require the same patience and practice it always has. But the availability of practices, the cross-pollination of traditions, the rapid iteration and refinement of methods, that's unprecedented.
It's like we're crowdsourcing consciousness evolution.
In a way, yes. And that itself might be a signature of the Second Axial Age. Not the lone sage achieving individual enlightenment, but collective intelligence emerging from networks of practitioners sharing discoveries.
The order speaks about this, how transformation happens one consciousness at a time, yet all at once, individual and collective simultaneously.
It's like that beautiful concept from chaos theory, the butterfly effect. Small changes in individual consciousness might cascade through the system, creating large-scale transformation. Each person who develops these new capacities becomes a seed point for further evolution.
Drake, I want to bring this down to earth a bit. If someone listening thinks, okay, maybe we are in a second axial age, maybe consciousness is evolving, what does that mean for them personally? How does one participate in such a vast transformation?
That's perhaps the most important question. First, I'd say recognize that if this is happening, you're not outside of it observing. You're part of it. Your consciousness, your choices, your development matters to the whole.
But that could feel overwhelming. How does my meditation practice or philosophical study affect global consciousness evolution?
Think of it like voting. One vote seems insignificant, but democracy depends on individuals choosing to participate. Similarly, each person who does the work of consciousness development, whether through contemplative practice, shadow work, philosophical inquiry, somatic awareness, whatever path calls to them, they're casting a vote for transformation.
And it's not just formal practices, is it? Every time we choose connection over separation, understanding over judgment, presence over distraction, we're strengthening those capacities.
Exactly. The Second Axial Age, if it's emerging, isn't happening in monasteries and academies alone. It's happening in conversations like this, in how we raise our children, in how we reimagine our institutions, in how we relate to crisis and uncertainty.
There's something hopeful in that. Instead of waiting for the next Buddha or Socrates, we recognize that we are all potential carriers of this transformation.
Though let's be honest about what's required. The first axial sages didn't achieve their insights casually. Buddha spent years in intensive practice. Socrates was willing to die for his principles. Confucius devoted his life to study and teaching. Transformation requires commitment.
The order certainly emphasizes this, that genuine transformation isn't a weekend workshop, but a life path requiring daily practice and sustained dedication.
And perhaps that's what the Second Axial Age asks of us, not to follow a sage, but to become sages ourselves, each in our own way, contributing our unique piece to the larger transformation.
There's another dimension to this we haven't fully explored, the role of technology, particularly artificial intelligence. How does AI factor into this potential second axial age?
That's fascinating and somewhat unsettling to consider. We're creating forms of intelligence that might surpass us in many ways. It's forcing us to ask fundamental questions. What is consciousness? What is intelligence? What makes human awareness unique?
It's like we're being forced to discover what consciousness actually is by trying to create it artificially.
And perhaps that inquiry itself is part of the transformation. The first axial age discovered individual consciousness by differentiating it from collective embeddedness. Maybe we discover the nature of consciousness itself by differentiating it from artificial intelligence.
Or maybe AI becomes part of the extended consciousness of humanity, like a technological expansion of the noosphere.
That's both exciting and terrifying to contemplate. We could be midwifing not just our own consciousness evolution, but the birth of entirely new forms of awareness. The question is whether we have the wisdom to guide that process.
Which brings us back to the importance of developing wisdom alongside intelligence, doesn't it? The first axial age wasn't just about becoming smarter, it was about becoming wiser, more ethical, more conscious.
Yes, and if we're approaching a second axial age without that wisdom dimension, we might create intelligence without consciousness, power without ethics, connection without compassion.
Drake, as we near the end of our exploration, I keep thinking about the name of our podcast, Ab Immemorabili, from Time Beyond Memory. There's something about this whole discussion that feels less like learning something new and more like remembering something ancient.
That's the concept of anamnesis and amnesis, isn't it? The Greek idea that learning is actually recollection, that the soul remembers what it knew before birth. Maybe evolution itself is a form of cosmic remembering.
So, the second axial age wouldn't be about inventing new consciousness, but uncovering capacities that were always potential within us.
Perhaps. The mystics have always said that enlightenment isn't about gaining something you lack, but recognizing what you've always been. Maybe collective transformation works the same way. Humanity remembering its true nature.
It reminds me of those moments in history when an idea whose time has come suddenly appears everywhere at once. Like the invention of calculus by both Newton and Leibniz simultaneously, or Darwin and Wallace both discovering natural selection.
As if the idea was already there in the field of consciousness, waiting for someone to tune into it. Maybe that's what's happening now on a massive scale. Millions of people tuning into new frequencies of awareness that were always there but couldn't be accessed until now.
The conditions had to be right. Global communication, scientific understanding, the breakdown of old structures, the pressure of crisis.
All creating the conditions for something to emerge that was always possible but never before actualizable at scale.
You know, Drake, whether or not we're literally in a second axial age almost doesn't matter, in a way. The question itself changes how we relate to our moment in history.
How do you mean?
Well, if we see ourselves as just living through civilizational collapse, environmental destruction, meaning crisis, that creates one kind of response. But if we see these same challenges as birth pangs of transformation, as the chrysalis stage between what was and what's emerging, that evokes very different energies.
It transforms us from victims of history to participants in evolution.
Exactly. And even if we're wrong, even if this isn't a second axial age, living as if it might be could help create the transformation we need.
There's profound wisdom in that. The power of framework, of story, of vision. How we interpret our moment shapes how we respond to it.
And that itself is a kind of second order thinking, isn't it? Choosing our interpretive framework consciously rather than being trapped in a single perspective.
Which brings us full circle. Whether or not we're in a second axial age, we need exactly the capacities such an age would demand. The ability to hold multiple perspectives, to think in systems, to balance individual and collective awareness, to integrate ancient wisdom and modern knowledge.
To remember what we've forgotten while discovering what we've never known.
To be bridges between worlds, the old and the new, the Eastern and the Western, the mystical and the scientific, the individual and the collective.
That's what the order points toward, isn't it? Not just preserving ancient wisdom, but preparing consciousness for what's emerging.
Creating philosophers for the second axial age, whether it's here or still coming. Thank you for joining us for this exploration.
Ab Immemorabili, from Time Beyond Memory.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing.
And remember, the wisdom you seek has always been within you.
You're not learning it.
You're remembering it.